good to be back with you for another day as we are continuing on in our journey through reConstruct, where we are walking step by step through the book of Nehemiah. So glad that you are here along with us for the journey. I would love for you to continue with us the entire time as we walk through this. Now, you can find all of the resources that you need in order to be a part of this study by visiting that URL right there, go.christtable.today/reconstruct. Go.christtable.today/reconstruct. You'll find all of the information on this study. You'll find the links that you need in order to participate each and every day with us as we walk through this journey of understanding deconstruction, and hopefully as we move through identifying how we can be a part of reconstructing whatever it is that is our next step in our faith journey, in our spiritual formation process. And love to see everybody logging on and checking in this morning, and really appreciate your feedback, even if it's just hello and a good morning, or if it's letting me know either live or by delay later on as you read and study the passages, what you think and what your big idea is for the passage, and what you're seeing is resonating in you. And even if you disagree, would love to hear that. I know that a lot of the journey through this is going to be me killing some sacred cows and giving some creative and different opinions and perspectives than maybe you're used to. And so it's a fun journey. Today, the journey takes us into the second chapter of Nehemiah, verses 9 through 15. So let's dig in. As we begin this journey, one of the things that we have come to understand is that a lot of what has been written about Nehemiah is not necessarily perhaps true to what the text itself portrays with Nehemiah. As many of us are complex creatures who are neither fully good nor neither perhaps fully bad, this is a description of Nehemiah as well. Nehemiah has really been born into a very difficult time period where his people, the Israelites, are in captivity away from their homeland. Being a historic Israelite Jew, Israel, Palestine is his homeland, but he has spent likely the entirety of his life in captivity in Babylon, being born into Babylon. And Nehemiah has risen through the ranks to become really the second person in the Babylonian kingdom. He is the cupbearer in the palace, which means he is the last line of defense, the one thing standing in the way of anybody who might try to murder the king and queen. And so he is a trusted advisor and confidant who goes to the king and requests that he be allowed to return to his homeland to help rebuild the city of Jerusalem in general, but specifically he wants to rebuild the wall. Nehemiah also, we have said in yesterday's Bible study, and if you missed this, I really encourage you to go back and watch day 3, because this is a very important key to understanding Nehemiah and his motivations. And we'll also see it as probably key in understanding the difficulty and difficult people that Nehemiah encounters along the way, and that it may not just be Nehemiah's goal of rebuilding the wall that receives pushback, but it may be pushback that is related to Nehemiah himself being what would be termed a queer individual in ancient times, a eunuch. So he has been given permission now by the king to return, and he has been resourced as well by the king to rebuild the city of Jerusalem, and it seems the wall in particular, and that is where we pick up our journey in today's text in verse 9 of chapter 2. When I came to the governors of the province west of Euphrates River, I delivered the king's letters to them. The king, I should add, had sent along army officers and horsemen to protect me. So Nehemiah guessed that there would be resistance to his arrival to rebuild the wall, and he is right. But when Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobiah, the Ammonite official, heard of my arrival, these are governors of Babylonia who live in the same region as the city of Jerusalem, they were very displeased that someone had come to help Israel. Now, this is taken from Nehemiah's memoirs, which means he is pontificating. He is essentially making a judgment call, an assessment of the situation from his perspective. And so let me just put that verse back up again. They were displeased that someone had come to help the people of Israel. This may or may not be the foundation of their resistance, but it is the perspective that Nehemiah chooses to believe on why they are resisting, and that they simply did not want the people of Israel to be helped. What the real reasons are will be left up to conjecture and perhaps may become more clear through the rest of the story. But I want to, for a moment, ponder that perhaps they were right. Now, Nehemiah and the book have set up this resistance by Sanballat and by Tobiah as being anti-right, as being anti-God, as being against progress, against the right thing, and against Nehemiah. Obviously, Nehemiah believes, or wants to believe, that God has validated and approved this rebuilding of the wall, and thus is validating and approving Nehemiah, which we've said, as a eunuch, would have been extremely important to receive affirmation and approval, because he would not have received affirmation and approval from the religious community, the worshiping community of Israel at all. And culturally, I know it's difficult today to even be someone of non-traditional sexual or gender identity, but in ancient times, you can multiply the difficulty today by multiples of difficulty. And so what we see here is that Nehemiah conjectures that the resistance is against God and is therefore wrong. But I wonder if the resistance is right. You know, I hate to go back and use a Star Wars analogy, but when you begin through the journey of Star Wars, you realize that the resistance those are the good guys. And sometimes labels bring with them a whole lot of baggage that isn't necessarily true. And so it may well be, and we should at least consider the point, that Tobiah and Sanballat are right in their resistance, are right in their difficulty approving this situation that Nehemiah is about to begin in the rebuilding of Jerusalem in general, but in particular the wall. The wall, as we've said, is the primary character in this story. It's too soon to say here who is right, Tobiah and Sanballat or Nehemiah. Nehemiah has proclaimed that God is on his side, but we've not really seen that God has clearly stated he is on the side of Nehemiah. Now, we see that Nehemiah has been given goodwill by the king and has been given resources and provisions And even that the king seems to have gone back on his previous word of saying the wall will not be rebuilt, but now it is. Those things, as we said on day 3 yesterday, could have come from God and God's work, or it could have just simply come by right of Nehemiah's ability to influence the king and the king's love and goodwill for Nehemiah. We just don't know yet who is right. And we can't quite yet trust that Nehemiah is acting on behalf of God, even though Nehemiah has stated unequivocally multiple times that this is a mission from God. Saying God is on one side does not necessarily mean that God is on one's side. In fact, I might even say oftentimes that the need to say it over and over again may be an indication that we should question whether or not it's true. Shakespeare, surely the lady doth protest too much. Surely Nehemiah doth say God is on his side too much. Sometimes the outsiders are right. Sometimes the people who are outside of the church, sometimes the people who are not people of faith, who are antagonistic to God or to religion, who are anti-God, atheists, agnostics, or people who have just walked away from the church or from people of faith, sometimes they're right. Sometimes they're right in their criticism. Sometimes they're right in where they stand. Sometimes they're right in their questioning. Sometimes, without qualification, they're just right. We shouldn't immediately assume that those who question, who criticize, or who confront are in the wrong. Oftentimes they are, but oftentimes they're not. So Nehemiah, now having met the resistance, arrives in Jerusalem, and 3 days later, he slips out during the night, taking only a few others with him. Now, I had not told anyone about the plans that God had put in my heart for Jerusalem. You see, now it's not Hananiah and the delegation, his brother, and the people who visited him at the very beginning of the book who put this plan in his heart. Now it's attributed to God, who put the plan in his heart for Jerusalem. He's elevated it. He's escalated it. We took no pack animals with us except for the donkey that I was riding, and after dark I went out to the valley gate, past the jackal's wall, and over to the dung gate to inspect the broken walls and burned gates. Then I went to the fountain gate and to the king's pool, but my donkey couldn't get through the rubble. So though it was still dark, I went up to the Kidron Valley instead, inspecting the wall before I turned back and entered again to the valley gate, and we'll hit pause there. But before we go, I want to point out one thing that is very interesting to me. Actually, there are two things that are very interesting to me. One of them I'm going to talk about on Sunday, so you're going to have to wait for that. But the other one is the fact that he arrives in Jerusalem, the text tells us there, I believe it is verse 13, and he sits and waits 3 days. Why? It doesn't tell us. Now, there probably is very good reason to wait 3 days. Maybe, perhaps it's because he was tired. Perhaps it was because he was concerned that by going and doing an inspection of the wall that he would raise suspicions about what was going on. Perhaps he didn't want a whole lot of people's input, or perhaps there is some or multiple other reasons for waiting 3 whole days before getting moving on a project that he feels like God has called him to do immediately, that God has ordained. But I think that there may well be, and this is where we'll end, I think that there may well be one lesson for us in this as we make our own journey through the unknown. And Nehemiah, as much as he is trying to present himself as being the guy in charge, the guy who knows, is really out of his experience and comfort level here. He is in a land that is his homeland, but which he has never been to, doing a job which, as far as we know, he has never been a foreman on any type of project, in charge of things that we, to our best understanding, have no reason to believe he has any experience at all in this. And so, on the basis of that, I think it's important for us to recognize that for ourselves, whenever we are in a situation where we are a foreigner in a strange land, where we don't understand, where we are outside of our experience or beyond our capacity to immediately know what the right thing to do next is to hit pause, to get away, and to give time for the dust to settle. There sometimes, I think, is something extremely holy and good and right about stepping away. I have oftentimes, even in my context in churches, seen individuals do this at a leadership level. Simply step away and let dust settle. I've seen people do this in general in the church pew. Whenever things begin to get questionable, to step away, to reflect, to recenter, to let the dust settle. There's a lot of pressure, at least in religious contexts, to not do that. And there, I think, is a reason to believe that the foundation for that inability or unwillingness to allow other people to hit pause, to step away, to step down, is fear. It's much more difficult to control outcomes whenever we can't control the person. And I think that Nehemiah gives us a great lesson here in not always needing or choosing to press forward no matter what, especially when there is danger of pressing forward into trouble, suffering, or into doing the wrong thing in the wrong way, where the risk is too great. Sometimes the most godly thing that you can do is to just simply get away for a season and let the dust settle. If God is omnipresent, everywhere, you can't get away from God. But you may, for a season, be able to get away from the other influences, the other voices, the other problems, in order to recenter your mind, your heart, your soul on what is good and what is true and what is right, so that you may move forward judiciously, rightly. Well, that's all the time that we have for today. It has been good to be with you this week. Looking forward to being with you on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock in the morning, Eastern time, right here. And then we'll be back on Monday again to continue through the reConstruct Bible study. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to say and what you think in the comments. But until next time,